In my presentation, I will cover 3 phases of interviewing. The before phase, and this is when you're perched from a point where you can look out at all the job opportunities and really get yourself organized and prepared. And then the during, which is when you take a leap going into an interview. And then lastly, the after, and this is when you've landed after an interview and hopefully pounced on a job opportunity. So starting with before. So again, this is when you're from a point where you're looking out at all the job opportunities and you're getting yourself organized and ready. So in the next couple of slides, I'll share more on where to find job opportunities, tips on your resume and cover letter, and then research that you should do on a company that you are going to be interviewing with, or maybe even just applying for and you want to know more about that company. So how you find opportunities has definitely improved since the days where you had to depend on newspapers for finding postings that were available. Some of you may not even know that that was a thing that people had to do. But luckily, for you today, you can search for jobs online or using apps. So LinkedIn is a great resource. If you don't have a LinkedIn account, you should probably create one to help build your network and search for jobs. So here, I'm going to post here in the chat. I have a link here from LinkedIn on rocking your LinkedIn profile to help create your profile if you don't already have one. But if you do have one, maybe a good idea to take a look at if you can improve it to make the best first impression for recruiters as if they're using LinkedIn to do their recruiting. So let me know. Sometimes Zoom can be weird about posting links. So hopefully that worked okay. So LinkedIn is just one of many. There's several other sites, including like Indeed, Glassdoor, ZipRecruiter, Monster. Gosh, you probably at this point know more than I do. So there's a lot of places out there that you can use job search engines. Another, which I kind of alluded to when I was talking about how you can find jobs at Avista, is you can manually go directly to a company's website. If you know a particular company you're interested in working at, each website, of course, is going to be a little bit different. So you'll just have to navigate where they've placed their opportunities that are available at that time. But that is another way that you can go right to the company's website and see what they have posted there. You just never know where they're going to be posting their positions at. So it's not a given that if you're relying on LinkedIn, that they will use LinkedIn. So you might have to go to their website to see what they have available. Another important aspect to finding opportunities is networking. So according to LinkedIn, those on LinkedIn who are referred by a connection are 4 times more likely to get a call with a recruiter, and then they're 9 times more likely to get hired. So the connections that you've made and the relationships you formed are often some of the best resources for finding your way into a new job. More than 70% of professionals get hired at companies where they have a personal connection. So this is important. And these connections could be with friends, family, neighbors, mentors, the list goes on and on. But if you want to expand your network, you may consider building an elevator pitch to be better prepared to introduce yourself to professionals when you want to make a lasting impression. Another thing that I wanted to point out is when you find opportunities and you're considering the job requirements, you may question or you may wonder if you meet all the requirements. So if you are truly interested in working at this company and you're truly interested in the position, my advice is to not rule yourself out when you're looking at the requirements. Some of the requirements, they may seem straightforward to you on whether or not you meet them or not, but it's important not to forget about your transferable skills. So you have to think about what the job entails and how you may have done similar work in other areas. And really it's for the recruiter or hiring manager to decide whether or not you're qualified. Because again, if you're really interested in the position, you can put yourself out there and they can decide either how you meet the requirements or, looking at other levels of experience they might have. This is a pretty good market right now for engineers applying for jobs. I think there's probably more postings out there than there are engineers that are applying. So definitely in your favor, and don't be afraid to apply for positions that you are really interested in. Okay, so jumping into your resume and cover letter. So your resume, this is probably pretty straightforward, but it should clearly show your accomplishments and what you can bring to the position. So you're going to be competing for positions with other students and maybe even other experienced engineers. So you want your resume to be strong and you want it to stand out. So with this, it's all a balance on, and you want to avoid within your resume distracting formatting that can take away from the content of your resume. But at the same time, a well-designed resume will give you a better chance at catching a hiring manager or recruiter's attention. So something that I recommend, and this may be a little different than what you've heard before, is if you want to improve the design of your resume, one thing you can do is you can go out and you can do a Google search for resumes and then look at the images of the resumes to find a design that you think might catch someone's attention, but again, you don't want it to be too flashy to distract, and you have to be able to replicate it yourself. So find a visual of a resume that you think would be good for you, and then also you want to look at how it organizes the content so that it's a good fit for the information that you plan on providing on your resume. But that's an option on looking at different formats, because I think resumes have definitely expanded beyond maybe the typical one kind of format that might be a way to gravitate. And that's okay too if you have that, but another way to stand out is just to create a well-designed resume. Something else that I like to tell students to include on their resumes is that you can also include your scholarships that you've been awarded and any extracurricular activities that you've been involved in. So if you have specific engineering scholarships or you're involved in engineering clubs, that's even better for applying for engineering positions. You also, specific to the clubs, the engineering clubs, you want to specify if you held any leadership position in that club. And then lastly, again, you probably all don't forget this because it can be automatic these days, but you want to make sure and run spell check. That's a good one to not forget. And then for the cover letter, so the cover letter is also known as the resume's best friend. I see quite a few student applications without cover letters these days, even when the job posting specifically asks for a resume and cover letter. So you want to include a cover letter along with your resume, especially if the hiring manager asks for one. So cover letters, they typically follow a standard format with really only 3 concise paragraphs. The first paragraph is where you introduce yourself and you let them know the position that you're applying for. And so this is also an opportunity to share why you are interested in the position. And then the middle paragraph, this is the bulk of the letter, and this is where you make your pitch for yourself and what makes you a great candidate. So you want to describe what you have to offer the employer and clearly connect how your qualifications match the job. You want to highlight key points from your resume and provide some more context in addition to your resume, but you definitely don't want to repeat your resume verbatim. And then the final paragraph, that is where you wrap up the letter by thanking the employer for their consideration. One other important thing that I wanted to note here is that it's always good to customize your resume and cover letter for the position and the company that you are applying at. If you do use the same cover letter for different companies, don't forget to change the company name if you are reusing a cover letter for similar engineering positions. So I probably see at least one cover letter a year where the applicant forgot to replace the previous company's name that they have also applied to. So you want to make sure and dot your I's, cross your T's, do your spell check, and replace anything specific to another company's name. And that you do that at the bare minimum. Okay, I think I covered all my points there. Next, I had research the company. So researching a company before an interview is important, even though you're not likely to get quizzed on your knowledge of the company. I mean, you could get asked, tell me what you know about our company. And this is where your research will definitely come in handy. But most likely, this isn't research for you to recite during the interview to show that you prepared. So the purpose of this research is really to provide you background information and to help inform your understanding of what the company is all about. And really, ultimately, this will also help you have a more informed conversation with interviewers. So remember that while a company is assessing you for a position, you should also be assessing if the company and the position, if they feel like the right fit for you. You want to do your research to better understand how the company's values and the role align with your experience and desire to work there. So again, there's a lot of engineering positions out there. So I think this wasn't the experience when I graduated, but I think engineers can be more choosy these days about aligning whether or not the company and the position are a fit for them. A little bit more on research. So some things that you can research include, the size of the company, if you aren't familiar with them, any recent news, biggest current initiatives, projects, products, clients, and then, like I had mentioned earlier, the organization culture, mission, and deeper. So the interview process and structure can really vary from company to company and from position to position. So you could interview with a single interviewer, or there could be a panel. So there could be a single interview that takes place, or there could be more than one interview packed into one day, or it could be spread out over more than one day. An interview could be focused more on technical, or it could also have more of an interpersonal focus. I mean, even you might be wondering, well, how come an engineering interview wouldn't just be technical focus? But you can also expect that the interview could have more interpersonal questions as well. So it really depends on the company and the position. So I can speak to engineering interview structure at Avista. So at Avista, there is always a panel for every engineering interview, and it has, so there's always a panel, and then also it can vary the size of the panel. That really can vary. It could be maybe a group of, I'd say probably at least 3 individuals, but I mean, you could have as many as 5 individuals on your panel as well. But there is always a panel for interviews. And then I'm thinking specifically right now for like if you're interviewing for like a specific engineering position, like a substation position, controls, electrical engineering position. But then for our student engineering development program positions and our engineering development program positions, we usually have more than one panel and more than one interview, but we do pack all the interviews. Usually, typically, if we can, we pack all the interviews into one day for the person. There may be several days of interviews, but one person might have 2, 3, 4 panel interviews as part of the process. And so since this can vary so much that when a company contacts you, whether it be via email or via phone, if they don't provide details for you on the process and the structure, you can ask at this point what to expect. And more than likely, they're not going to tell you all the details about the interview. They're not going to let you know if it's going to be technical probably or interpersonal, but they will and should be willing to provide information on the number of panels or the number of panel members. And then if they ask you what time you want to start the interview, what time works for you to start the interview, they can also give you the window so that you know how long the interview will last, because that can vary as well. If you have several panel interviews, They could be shorter, or they could be longer too. Another thing is you could also get asked to do a presentation, and they'll provide that context ahead of time so that you have time to prepare for that. But you do want to pay attention to any details that the person who's contacting you to schedule the interview, the details that they provide on how early they like you to arrive, either in person or for joining a virtual interview. So something that we've learned over, we being engineering hiring managers, that we've learned over this last couple years is, with everything being virtual, the tricky thing about virtual interviews is that if you join too early, there's a possibility that you could interrupt the previous interview if the panel has just one ongoing virtual interview meeting. So hopefully the interviewer has a virtual lobby set up, but even then, everyone in the meeting can sometimes be notified that someone is in the lobby, depending on the platform that they're using for the virtual interview meeting. So at Avista, if we're doing a virtual interview, we usually say do not join any sooner than 5 minutes early, just because we don't want the lobby notification popping up for everyone to see, including the person interviewing. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then, if you're going to show up early in person, of course, it's good to always navigate ahead of time how you're going to get there. And then you can always, wait in your car, and you can ask them what's appropriate, when would they expect you to show up early, but you definitely don't want to be running late. So that's a little bit about interview structure. And then for prepared answers. So of course, one of the most nerve-wracking things about interviews is that you don't know what they are going to ask you. So there is an abundance of interview questions online to help you prepare, and really even a decent amount of suggestions on how to help frame some of the more common interview questions. But one thing that you can expect is that an interviewer will likely open up the interview questions with a good icebreaker question, such as, tell us about yourself. So because this is pretty much a guarantee that you'll need to introduce yourself, you want to have a concise introduction already prepared. So another good icebreaker question might be, tell us about yourself and why are you interested in this job? So you should be prepared to share why the position is interesting to you. If they ask you to introduce yourself and share why you're interested in working at the company, this would be a great time to share some of the information that you learned from your research that resonated with you when you were preparing. As you prepare your answers to interview questions, like I said, there's a lot of interview questions already on the internet to help you practice. Specifically though, for engineering interview questions, you want to think about the experiences that apply to situations around problem solving, communicating, teamwork, and working through problems with others. So like I mentioned earlier, that could be technical problems or that could be interpersonal problems. You want to remember that the company is looking for what you can do as well as how you do it. So you want to think about your EQ or emotional intelligence and soft skills just as much as your technical skills. So when you answer questions that ask you to share how you handle the specific scenario or situation, it's good to keep this STAR method in mind when you provide your response. So S stands for situation, and this briefly sets the stage by sharing the context around the situation or challenge that you faced. And then T is for task. You want to describe your responsibility or role in the situation or challenge. So this is where people can gravitate toward talking about what their team did, but the interviewer wants to know what your specific role was on the team. So make sure that you are providing a clear image of the role you played in the task. Don't overuse we, since you want to be talking more about your role. And then A is action. You want to explain the specific action you took or skills you use to handle the situation or overcome the challenge. And then R, result, this explains the outcome that you reached and how the problem was resolved. You don't want to forget this important part of the response. And even if the question that they're asking is maybe more of a negative situation, like tell us about a time that you had to deal with a difficult disagreement with someone, as you're going through your scenario and you hit the result, this could be an opportunity to share what lessons that you've learned or something that you would do differently, but you definitely want to make sure and hit on how the problem was resolved. And then lastly, when it comes to practicing for interview questions, saying your answers out loud, and even better if you can practice with someone that can give you feedback, is always really good. You want to make sure that your responses are concise and clear as you answer the question to help the interviewer better get to know you. And by getting to know you, I mean, this includes what you know, what you can do, as well as how you do it. So the more you can practice and kind of having some of these things down in preparation for the interview, the better off you'll be. And then for prepared questions. So remember that while a company is assessing you for a position, you should also be assessing if the company and position feels like the right fit for you. You always want to go into an interview prepared with questions of your own for the interviewer. So it's pretty much a guarantee that at the end of the interview, they will ask you if you have questions for them. And so it's good to come prepared with 1 to 2 questions. If you do have more, that's fine, but you just might not have time to ask them all. So, this can really be asking them whatever would resonate with you. But some could be, along what does a typical day in the life of this role look like? How would you describe the ideal candidate for this position? And then if the job posting didn't clearly specify, you might want to ask if there's flexibility to work remote in the position if this is important to you. What you don't want to do is you do not want to ask for feedback at the end of an interview, such as, how did I do? Or what challenges do you think I have? It's really not an appropriate question, and the interview panel won't be able to actually answer that question at that time. So that's something you want to avoid. Keep it to things that's going to help you evaluate the company. Quick tips on following up after an interview, and then just a quick plug for saving for retirement in your future related to 401k, because my predecessor, Scott Waples, he would be disappointed if I didn't bring this up with students. So for the follow-up, within 24 hours of the interview, you want to send an individual thank you to everyone you met in the interview. Email is perfectly fine these days to send your thank you. So if you only have the email address from the HR recruiter, and even if they weren't in the interview that took place, it's totally okay to send them the thank you and ask them to pass it along to the interviewer or the interview panel. The thank you email, it may seem like an insignificant last step, but the thank you, it really will show that you value the interviewer or interview team's time, and then it provides you one extra opportunity to sell yourself again. Here you can express your unique strengths that you bring to the role, and then you can also share any talking points that you may have forgot to address. Just keep the email concise, and you want the note to leave a lasting impression. Also, for follow-up, if you don't hear back immediately, don't panic. The hiring process involves screening usually multiple candidates, and that can get stretched out depending on schedules with interviewers and then those interviewing. And then there's also usually a wrap-up conversation with HR and the interview team. And so that can kind of drag things out. It's really a process that it takes longer than expected. Even for me as a hiring manager, I'm always amazed at how long the hiring process can take, especially when you're anxious to get a person in the position. But don't panic if you don't hear back immediately. And then, as I mentioned, lastly, 401k. You may or may not be familiar with what a 401k is, depending on how much people around you talk about finances and savings. So for those of you who are not familiar with the 401k, what it is it's a feature of a qualified profit sharing plan that allows employees, so this will apply to you, to contribute a portion of your wages to individual accounts. So this account, these accounts will play a key role in your retirement savings. And I know what you're probably thinking, you haven't even started your career. Why am I talking to you about retirement? But just keep in mind that it's never too early to start saving. So once you land a job, I want this to be top of mind for you. You want to find out when you are eligible to contribute to your retirement fund and what the company match will look like. So this should be something that is included in your benefit package that you'll have an opportunity to review once offered a position. So again, but this is not something you really want to ask for your follow-up question at the end of the interview. Wait till they make the offer and you can start thinking about some of the benefits that the company has to provide. But really, the bottom line with the 401k is if you can afford to, start early as soon as you're hired, and then by all means, if you can, contribute the max amount allowed, and then you just want to forget about it. Just let it do its thing throughout your career.